Hey everybody, I hope you're having a wonderful Sunday today. I want to take today's video in a little bit of a different direction. I know that we're probably all a little bit tired of politics and, watching the news and everything going on right now today. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about something a little bit different. You know, this whole situation is pretty unique, but the reality is it also does offer a couple of opportunities to do some things that we maybe don't have time for in our regular everyday lives. And part of that is spending a little bit more time at home with your family and enjoying some things you don't normally get to enjoy. And one thing that I've had a really good time doing and I've enjoyed greatly has been reading to my sons. My sons are 17 months and 5 months. And so it's not clear that how much they're understanding of what I'm reading, but they certainly love books. They seem to love listening to me read, and it's something that I've really enjoyed doing. What I wanted to do today is talk about one of my favorite books, a book that I'm currently reading to my sons, and it's a fantasy book. I thought that might be a good idea to try to escape a little bit from today's reality and dive into a fantasy world of a bit more magic and a bit more cheerfulness and sunniness. And so the book that I want to talk to you about today is called The Princess and the Goblin. It's by George MacDonald, who is fast becoming one of my favorite authors. I actually found out about George MacDonald from my favorite author, C.S. Lewis. In C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce, which is one of my favorite stories of his, he has a tribute to George MacDonald. And as I was reading The Great Divorce, and I've read it several times, it's one of my favorites, and as I was reading through it, I kind of noticed that he was talking about this George MacDonald character as if he was a real guy. And so I decided to Google him, and sure enough, he is a real guy, and not only was he a major influence on C.S. Lewis, but he was also a major influence on J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and also G.K. Chesterton, who's the author of Orthodoxy, one of my favorite books of his. And so if C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton and J.R.R. Tolkien all love George MacDonald, I figured I'd probably love him too. And so I went and picked up the first book I found of his, which was The Princess and the Goblin. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. Now, George MacDonald was a 19th century minister and author. He actually pioneered and basically invented today's modern genre of fantasy. And he is absolutely a phenomenal writer, magnificently underrated. I love everything I've read of his so far. Every book that I've read of his so far is becoming, instant classics and new favorites. But this one in particular really stood out. Maybe because it's the first book of his that I read, but it's really just a beautiful story, and I absolutely love the way it's written. I know that I sincerely enjoy reading it to my kids, and I thought that you guys might as well. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to go over a couple of things in the book that I really enjoyed, in hopes that you'll pick it up and perhaps read it to your kids while we got a little extra time on our hands. So the first thing that I wanted to go over was the way the book is written. Now, George MacDonald, again, was a minister in the 1800s, and so there is some Christian themes and Christian overtones and religious themes within the book, but they're not explicit. So if you're not a religious person, you can still enjoy the fantasy, the adventure, the mystery of the novel. It's truly a great story. And so, but one thing that I really do love about it is some of these religious overtones and these themes that are kind of beautifully woven into the story. And the imagery of the book is really good too. But here's what I really like about it. In many of the, fairy tales and fantasy novels and, Disney type, prince and princess movies, a lot of the times we are kind of suckered into just assuming that the prince and princess is good simply because they're a princess. And, for example, Lion King. Lion King's a good example. The prince in Lion King, Simba, is actually a pretty terrible prince for the first 3/4 of the movie. I don't mean to harp on Simba, but he's kind of arrogant. He's kind of power hungry, and he's disobedient, and his arrogance almost gets himself and his future wife killed in the beginning of the movie. And so now he does redeem himself at the end, but you're kind of rooting for him as the good prince the whole time. It's not so in The Princess and the Goblin. In The Princess and the Goblin, the heroine, Princess Irene, who is a young girl about 8 or 9, she's not a princess because she's the king's daughter. She's a princess because she is good, honorable, and virtuous. The king is not a king because he has a crown on his head or because he's the leader of the kingdom. He's the king because he's a good, honorable, and noble man. The hero of the story, Curdy, who is a young boy, maybe about 14 or 15, He works in the mines underneath the kingdom. And he's not a prince in title, but the princess and the king treat him as a prince regardless, because he is a noble, honorable, courageous, brave, and virtuous young man. And so I love the way that's written. Conversely, the goblins in this story, the antagonists, the goblins are these horrible little ugly creatures with no toes, and there's some playful elements like that in there, but they're not bad because they're ugly. They're ugly because they're bad. And, in the story, something happens to them in the far off distant past. Maybe they're overtaxed or persecuted in some way. And instead of rising up and standing up for themselves and standing up for their rights, they went and basically retreated underneath the mountain, and they sulked. And their hatred and their envy kind of resulted in this outward manifestation of their own ugliness, right? So it's just a beautiful way to write the story, and the way it's written in there. And one of my favorite parts of the book, I'll go over that briefly, and then we'll get out of here. But one of my favorite parts of the book is in this story. Irene has Princess Irene. She has a great-great-grandmother who is essentially a spirit, a guardian angel, who kind of looks after her and helps her. And the catch is, only Irene can see her, and she can only be seen when she chooses to be seen. And so Irene is basically her grandmother, her great-great-grandmother, her father's mother's father's mother, is looking out for her this whole time. And at one point in the story, Curdy, the hero, gets himself in a bit of a bind. He gets himself captured by the goblins. And I'm not going to give away anything too important to the plot, so this isn't a spoiler alert or anything, but Curdy gets himself captured by the goblins, and Irene, with the help of her grandmother, goes in after him. And she rescues him, but Curdy is absolutely beside himself. He can't figure out how this 8-9-year-old princess, who has absolutely no survival skills whatsoever, no knowledge of the mountain, can somehow, not only did she find him in utter pitch black darkness, but she rescued him and found a way out that not even he could find a way out. He couldn't, for the life of him, figure out how that she was doing this. And so he asked her several times, I don't understand. How do you know where you're going? She's, my grandmother's helping me. And he's like, well, that's nonsense. There's nobody here. And he can't figure it out. He can't understand. And she says, look, we'll talk about it later. Let's just get out of here first. And he was like, well, I got nothing better to do, and you got me this far, so let's hit it. And so they get out of there, and she immediately endeavors to take him right up to her grandmother and prove that she was telling the truth the whole time. And so she goes up and she opens the door. She, up 3 or 4 different staircases and down these long rows of doors and long hallways, and she finally makes it to her great-grandmother's door. And she opens the door, and it's this big, extravagantly beautiful room with this, beautiful fireplace, and her grandmother is sitting there dressed in white, and she's this fabulously beautiful. She's very, very old, obviously, but she appears young and beautiful. And Irene goes and sits on her grandmother's lap and I thank you, grandmother, for helping me. See, I told you, Curdy. And she's talking to her grandmother, and all this time, Curdy's just sitting there in disbelief, like, what is going on here? And turns out Curdy can't see anything. All he sees is an empty room. And he sees Irene kind of talking to herself. And so he's dismayed, and he can't believe that she's making such a fool of him. And he doesn't understand why she's doing this to him, why she's lying to him, why she's carrying on in this manner. And he gets very upset, and she gets upset because she can't figure out how he's not seeing it. And so this is one of the most brilliant parts of the book right here, and it's this tiny little thing, but it really stuck out to me. She reasons that she's very hurt that Curdy doesn't believe her, but then she reasons with herself that if it's hurtful that Curdy doesn't believe her, it must be equally hurtful to Curdy that she doesn't believe that he can't see anything. And so Curdy leaves. He gets upset and he leaves, and her grandmother sits there and she tells her that you have to be content not letting him not believe you for now. Don't worry, it'll all come right in the end, but you have to be content just letting him go. And so there we start to see the religious overtones kind of creeping into the story, where you don't necessarily have to see it to believe it's there and to know it's there. And sometimes the thing that we see, that many people see, as so plainly obvious, there are very many people that can't see it for the life of them. And maybe the best course of action isn't for us to judge them or be hurt with the fact that they can't see it, but to love them and to care for them anyway, and to treat them with the same dignity and respect as you otherwise would, because it might be equally hurtful to them that we don't see what they see. And so that's just a beautiful, beautiful little element of the story, and it does work out well in the end. I'll let you pick up the book and read it yourself to find out how. But I truly do love this book. It's a wonderful, phenomenal book. It's a great book for you to read to your kids. I sincerely recommend this book. It's just a great read. And so anyway, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this bit of a different direction with this video. Hopefully you don't find it cheesy or corny, but I love it, and I hope you guys will too. All right, thank you very much, guys. I'll see you next time, and have some fun with your family. Enjoy. Bye.